Building a custom gaming PC is easily one of the most rewarding things that you can actually do as a PC gamer. Being able to shave those extra dollars off doing it yourself as opposed to ordering from one of the many boutique SIs. Not to mention the amount of power that you can actually build into a gaming PC is significantly higher than what you can normally buy. And among the many types of PC that you can build, there is one that is elusive, and it eludes most people. And that is an RGB gaming PC that uses exactly one piece of RGB software to control everything. Now, there's a couple good reasons for that. This is a journey that starts in the most unlikely places, and more often than not, the pitfalls you can fall into are so small and so irregular that almost nobody has actually done it. So I'm going to show you how to do it, step by step, part selection and all, and talk about why it is so hard to do. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Hello and welcome. My name is Wolfie. You're watching GreaterThanPie, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Yes, you. So let's talk about building the one RGB gaming PC, because I succeeded at it and it's not exactly easy to do. And I've actually attempted this a couple different times. I think I've tried it 3 or 4 different times before finally succeeding. So let's talk about the roadblocks that actually prevents a lot of people from making this kind of PC. Unfortunately, there are certain vendors who are vendor locked to their own RGB software. These are Asus mostly. Corsair does their own type of vendor locking. And because of that, there are just certain things that aren't going to work intercompatibly. Another big pitfall that you can fall into is using a type of fan that cannot be addressed properly via a motherboard connector, or having a fan that's not compatible with a specific type of RGB software. These pitfalls exist within product stacks and even intercompatible different types. So there are things that you're going to want to look out for when selecting components. More importantly though, this process does not start in the same place that it does for any other PC build. Normally, your best bet is to start with your budget and then speccing out your system so that you can min-max your GPU and your CPU cost so that you have the absolute best bang for the buck. But if you're trying to build the one RGB PC, you need to start in an unlikely place, and that's at a place that's normally at the end of the process: peripherals. Now, the reason you want to start with your peripherals is because this is where the most pitfalls are. If you pick a vendor that isn't compatible with the other vendors, then you're going to be adding more software to begin with. For example, Glorious requires their own special software. Drop requires their own special software, and those are for your like boutique custom keyboards. Fortunately for those, you can load them up with software and then never run the other software again. But that is just one aspect that you can kind of run into issues. Another one is if you buy an Asus product of any kind, they are all going to be locked to Asus Aura. So when it comes down to it, your first choice is going to be your vendor that you're going to go with for everything, the target that you want. Now, I'm going to recommend Razer because it is the easiest, but if you wanted to build an all Corsair PC, you could do that. Or if you wanted to build an all Asus PC, you could do that. Both are technically compatible, but you're going to be locked into those peripherals. Just make sure you know the price of each peripheral type that you want to do and whether or not you'd be okay with that product stack being integral to everything. NZXT is another one that you can also technically do all of the same. You just need to plan it out. Now, before we get building though, we are going to need to talk about the tools that you should probably have on hand when building a gaming PC. Let's start with the basics. A screwdriver with either interchangeable bits or a different set that actually has multiple different screwdrivers in it. Most of the time, most basic driver kits will have a bit that will work. But if you want to get a kit from something like iFixit, which will contain other tools for using more precise screwdrivers, spudgers, priors, that kind of thing, for more in-depth electronic repairs, this could have some use in your toolkit. Another thing I like to keep around, Velcro cable ties. I actually prefer cable ties to zip ties 100% of the time when it comes to building a PC. And it's mainly because the cable ties can be undone and reused, and zip ties are a little bit more annoying. And finally, on hand, you should probably have some thermal paste, just in case you have to install a CPU cooler that doesn't have it already. I have this Noctua thermal paste that's been in my collection for a little while now. I bought a tube and it lasts forever. All right, now that we got our tools in place, let's actually start building this thing. Let's start with arguably our most important choice, our motherboard. Now our motherboard today is this, the ASRock X570 Tai Chi Razor Edition. Now this is kind of cheating a little bit for this, but you can do this just as easily with an MSI motherboard if you can find one for a reasonable price, since those can get kind of expensive. So I've done this with the Pro Carbon Wi-Fi, but then I've also done it with this one, and this one's just a little bit better because instead of the RGB on the motherboard being handled by ASRock's own RGB software, it is handled by Razer Chroma, which means that this whole motherboard will show up in Razer Chroma like any other Razer product. Additionally, all of these RGB headers can be addressed in Razer Chroma, which means that we no longer have to worry about running it through a compatibility layer. It's just natively gonna be there. This motherboard is also pretty nice because it is very well shielded. There's a metal backplate on it, which will help protect things. It's rather heavy. I/O wise, we've got 7 USB ports, a BIOS flashback and a BIOS flash button, Wi-Fi, keyboard mouse combo jack for those old school stuffs, a USB-C port, along with a large array of audio ports for surround sound if you would like it, and gigabit LAN. You of course have 2 different front panel connectors for USB 3, and then 2 connectors for USB 2 on the inside. Fan connector wise, you have no shortage of fans. 5 different fan connectors throughout the motherboard itself. Under here, we've got 2 different M.2 slots, which is on the top slot and the bottom slot. 8 different SATA ports along the side here. And then of course, RGB accents on everything. And it does require 2 8-pins to power. So this bad boy is a bit of a power hungry little board, but at the same time, for X570, it's probably one of the better ones out there. Also, after a BIOS update, this fan does spin at 0 RPM under most loads, which is pretty nice. And the audio is shielded right here along the side. And there's also an external or a front panel USB-C right there. Lots of little cool details on it, but the biggest thing is the fact that this motherboard itself can be used with Razer Synapse directly. Now we do have this perched on top of the box it came with. Since cardboard itself is static resistant, it will help us with the possibility of shocking, but we're in a very humid environment, which means that the chances of shocking right now is very low. For our processor, we have to go with Ryzen, of course, because, well, X570. So I've got a Ryzen 7 5800X. This processor can be picked up for pretty reasonable these days. And if you're building a gaming PC right now, as opposed to going with the more expensive AM5, this would be the more sensible option. To install the processor is pretty simple. You just lift up this retention mechanism right here. And then there's a triangle right in the front corner of this. And there's a triangle, really hard to see on here, also on there. You just go ahead and set your processor in. It should just drop into place without any force. And then you close this mechanism back up. Now with our processor installed, let's go ahead and actually get our mounting for our CPU installed, which is where this backplate and this gasket come in. So we're gonna be using an AIO from EK, and this stuff comes with it. This backplate is fairly straightforward. It's very similar to the default one that comes with it. And this gasket is really just there to make everything a little bit nicer. So it's easiest to get this started like this, where we line this up to this. So we want the 2 holes to line up. And then we set the gasket down with one of the holes coming through. Come on, it's a tricky one. Like so. When we can take our mount and just kind of screw it in. So now we have the rest of them. Now we can screw in the other 2. Our RAM today is an AMD favorite. We got Trident Z Neos by G.Skill, and we're gonna wanna install them in these 2 slots right here. The second furthest from this, or second closest to the CPU in the last slot. This is channel 1 on this motherboard, and then these 2 will be channel 2. Now these are pretty good. We've got 3,600 mega transfers, and they're 16 gigs each, which gives us a total of 32 gigabytes of pure gaming RAM. Our motherboard is looking pretty good. We don't have an M.2 slot to throw in here today, so we can just go ahead and set that aside while we prep our AIO, because that's also a good thing to get before you get into the case. We've got an EK AIO here. This is the EK 360 RGB. It's got one of those names that just rolls off the tongue because of how weird it is. It's a pretty slim rad with its pump and housing all being right here. And we've already got it set up with the AMD mounting brackets, which are these right here. This has support for AM5, I think, AM4, and most of the new Intel generations. But there has been an updated version of this because the fans themselves have actually been discontinued, but we already have them. So we're gonna use those. So we're gonna set this up in an exhaust configuration, and we have to think about where our tubes are gonna run from. So we wanna think about that when we're running the cables for our fans. So in that configuration, I have found that the tubes of this work best if we do something like mount it up like so on the top, and then we run the tubes over to our CPU, something like that, which means we want our fan cables to come out the back of this. So if we flip it this way, means that our fan cable should look something like that. And we want the fan hub itself to be facing into the radiator. Now, personally, what I like to do is I like to stack my fans so that the cables themselves are as close as possible, just like so. What's good about this AIO is it actually comes with these specific screws. And why these are good is these actually are only threaded up to the point that they are needed to be installed for the fans. So they go straight through and you can't over tighten them into the fins. Get that started. I recommend that you always go in a cross pattern like this. And the reason for that is that if you over tighten one too much and it's not quite in the right spot, then it will become difficult to get the other side in. There's a little bit of compression on all of these types of things. It's intentional, but because of that compression, it's very much possible if you have one side up as opposed to the other, that you're gonna put excessive amounts of torque. Now, one of the reasons we went with the EK Vardar fans is actually because of the fact that they have stuck to an open standard for the most part, which means that these cables right here plug into a standard addressable RGB header, which is exactly what we have on our motherboard, which means that this will work 100% with our motherboard, which is probably the most important feature of this. Now, they do daisy chain together to make your life a little bit easier, but they're not as convenient as the Lee SL120 V2 RGBs that I looked at recently. I wish that those were more compatible, because then I would have done that. All right, and with that, our AIO is pretty set up. Another thing that we can kind of do just to make our life a little bit easier is we can daisy chain these together right now. So cool, our fans are all done. And as you can see, once we bundle them up, they'll be literally like this tiny little thing. In fact, actually, that's where these cable ties come in, just like that. Now, much like the AIO choice is dictated by its intercompatibility, so too are the additional fans that we will be running. These are all EK Vardars, except these are the ones that you buy a la carte as opposed to the ones that came with an AIO. They all have this standardized RGB connector, which means that we can connect this directly into our motherboard. Now, what's interesting is these are the non-addressable variation, which means these are gonna have 12 volts. Fortunately, this also has 12 volts. So we'll be all good with the motherboard controlling everything. So our RAM, our motherboard, our CPU cooler, and our fans are now all synced. Okay, let's talk about the case. Now, the case itself is actually one of the easiest choices you have to make. If it doesn't come with RGB fans, any case by Cooler Master should actually have compatible RGB fans. Any case by Lee probably has compatible fans, and unfortunately, any of the RGB cases from Corsair will more than likely not. But we do have a Corsair case today. We have the 5000D Airflow version. And the reason that we went with this case is it's easy to build in, and without the kicked out RGB fans. It's actually a really good price. And it also fits a 360 on the top, 360 on the front, 360 on the side if we really wanted to do it that way. So there's lots of cool options for cooling in this case, but more importantly, lots of room to work. The first thing you're going to want to do before you actually install your motherboard into your case is to make sure that these standoffs are in the correct place. Now, fortunately, this is already set up for ATX, which is the size of our motherboard. So all we're going to have to do is install directly, but if they are not, you can rearrange these standoffs to fit. Let's go ahead and insert our motherboard. Now we want to be careful with our motherboard not to put too much torque anywhere like close to the RAM, because we don't want to accidentally, wrench it out. Personally, how I like to do it, since this has got a nice metal backplate, is we're going to grab it along the backplate. We're going to guide it in so that the IO shield goes along first. We've got a built-in IO shield, so we don't have to worry about installing the IO shield. But if you don't, go ahead and install it before you install your motherboard. And then we're just going to lower it until this little nub actually holds it into place. And now our motherboard's mostly installed at this point. We just got to screw it down. To avoid cross-threading your standoffs, go slow at first. Just kind of like let the screw guide itself into place. Don't put a lot of force. You don't want to accidentally damage these standoffs, or even worse, rip them out of the bottom of the case. Motherboard is installed and ready to go. Now we're going to need to thermal goop it up. Now, this is a point of contention in the PC building community. How much thermal goop do you put on the CPU? Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys about something. When I pulled this system apart for various testing and to build this, I did not have enough thermal goop before, which is not good. Normally I do like a little pea-sized thing in the middle. Yeah, we're gonna need to put a little bit extra. So I'm gonna do one that I've seen recommended by a couple different people, but I'm gonna do the X pattern today, which is you just do that and that. Just like that. And hopefully that will give us more coverage. You really can't overdo thermal paste, but you can definitely underdo thermal paste. Now for this, we're gonna wanna run our cables so that they go into this hole back here. It's gonna run us to the back of the case, which is exactly where we want our cables to be so that we can hook them into everything. Beautiful. You see now that's gonna be right behind the entire thing. Now, much like the other side of this, there are specific screws. They are these. They have a nice flat head, very, very small. So we're just gonna line her up, and we're not gonna tighten it down yet. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do just the four corners, and we're gonna keep them kind of loose. And this is so that we can adjust this forward and backwards if we need to, and then we'll tighten it down. The reason you don't wanna use the wrong size screws in a radiator like this is you don't want to accidentally puncture into any of the water lines that go through the radiator. We're just going to lower this down, lining them up with the holes, and try to put a little bit of pressure here while we work. Just going to kind of get these on. I'm not tightening them down. I'm just getting the caps on and in place. Go. And one more. Trust me, it's much easier to do it this way than it is to do it the other way, which is tighten them down piece by piece. Okay, now we're going to do it in a cross pattern again. We're just keeping our hand on here to try to ensure that we have even mounting pressure until this grips, which we are now gripped. So now we can tighten it down the rest of the way. The springs will stop it before it's too tight. So now comes the fun part of plugging in the front panel connectors and anything that needs to be connected that's gonna get in the way of everything else. Now, before we get too far though, let's actually get some of our power supply cables run, because we have just enough room to plug them in right now. We're gonna wanna run these two cables preemptively, because getting to them after we've got a lot of stuff inside this case is gonna suck. In fact, we probably should have done this earlier, but we should be able to get them. So we got a modular power supply. We've got this, the CX1000, which is an NZXT model. There's no RGB, nice and blacked out fan, fully modular, and that's really all that matters for this. So we have a nice modular power supply. Clasps are at the top on this motherboard, and that's going to lock in like so. And then we just need to run this straight behind here. We can now tighten down our radiator, since it is in place enough that we can run our cables. And that is looking really clean going through there. So we're just gonna put that like so, and then tighten her down. Okay, we're starting to get somewhere here. So we've got our motherboard pretty much ready to go, our cooling all set up, nice and screwed down. Let's go ahead and get our front panel connected, along with any of these other extra wires that need to go into the motherboard. So we've got our front audio, our USB, and our USB, and our other USB. The easiest way to do these and to tackle this is to actually get them through the ports that are closest to where they need to be. So we're gonna separate these. This one goes towards the top, and this one goes towards the top. So we're gonna separate them by putting them through our cable management channel right where they need to be. Now these two are pretty easy in this case. So we've got a little keyed notch right up here at the top, and that just needs to slide in to here. Now you want to be a little careful. You don't want to accidentally bend the pins. It will just click into place. This one, also fairly easy to do. You just want to make sure that we line up the pins on the correct side. Push this in softly, and that will just kind of click into place like so. And there you go. That is your front USB 3 and your USB-C. We also have our audio and our painfully annoying tiny little connector. This thing has what's known as a keyboard. Now this little thing is pretty nifty because it has everything labeled on it. And so you can just kind of plug your stuff directly into that. So we have power LED, power plus and minus, which we got minus, all good to go. And we can just plug this directly into our motherboard, which will happen right down here. And now our front panel is hooked up and our audio port is gonna be right there. So we just go ahead and boom. And now we are good. So that should be all of our front panel all hooked up. Now with triple fans, it's gonna sound weird, but you really wanna make sure that you line the fans up first so that before you start to really like get them in, because you may need to adjust them top, bottom, left and right. They can get a little wonky. That's good. And then much like before, cable tie. As tight as I would like it, but that's fine. That will get us there. Let's get that in the case. All right, let's do that little bit of cable management work. And then we can finish her up. Okay, that was a bit of work, but everything's hooked up. Now I did do one thing that I'm gonna suggest you also do if you're doing this kind of build with these kinds of RGB connectors. When you have to connect to the 12 volt ones, they don't actually daisy chain unlike the other ones. So I had to use what's known, I think, affectionately as an octopus splitter, but I don't know if it has an official name. So those things don't really have a lot of grip. A little bit of electrical tape goes a long way, just electrical taping the two connectors in place so that they don't separate. But we're pretty cable managed. I mean, we got a lot of the worst stuff out of the way. So now it's just a matter of getting our PSU in here, hooking up all of our connectors, putting our GPU in here, and then also our storage, which we've got a couple of drives. We've got a Samsung 1 terabyte 870 QVO, and a Western Digital Black 4 terabyte. So we're gonna load those up right now. We went with these drives for their specific combination of performance and cost. So the WD Blacks actually perform very, very well in our testing. I actually have a video that I'll link up top for you guys on that one, but they perform very, very well and they're very cost effective for how much space you actually get. Now, that being said, I did see like a 4 terabyte drive recently that was the 4 terabyte SSD that was approaching what I would consider reasonable. So we may be getting past the point of needing spinning storage in gaming PCs. And this is where we're gonna store the majority of our games library. The cool thing about this case is it can fit a surprisingly large number of drives into it. And a lot of it's solid state storage. Like this case is just a versatile little case. Now we could just install our SSD via the caddy, right, like so. And there we have everything minus our power supply and our GPU. All right, so as mentioned prior, we got our NZXT C100. Now, this case is good because you can actually install both fan up or fan down, nice and user-friendly. And technically, if you didn't want to do this step, you could do this afterward, but I'm just gonna plug everything in right now. This power supply is actually pretty good for a couple reasons. One of them is that it has a lot of PCIe spots. Now, unfortunately, the revision of this PSU has a 12VO connector there instead of another PCIe. And so unfortunately, the revision of this was not usable by me, which is one of the reasons why I ended up with a pretty beefy EVGA power supply for the next PC that I'm building. We're gonna do this one fan down, by the way, because we get a nice intake down below. There she is. That's why we wanted to do that pretty much last, because now our bottom connectors are pretty much locked in place. So what GPU are we throwing in here? There's really only one choice, the 7900 XTX. And we specifically are using an MSI card. And the reason for that is MSI is one of the vendors who are not locked down for Razer. We'll show you how to make this work in the software, but it's not that hard to do. Let's use the MSI bracket as well. Now this GPU does come with its very own support bracket that was actually designed for this GPU in mind. This big girl goes right on in. Nice and easy. And then the brace goes on. There we go. Oh, it actually holds pretty tight. So the first one of the GPU can actually go in, which that's good. I've never used this bracket. I used the one for the 6800. There you go. Looks kind of intimidating. It's like a chunk of cables. All right, let's see if she posts. We got fan spin. RGB is lighting up. All good signs. See if we can get something on the monitor. Well, I think we just went straight into Windows. Okay. Well then, we have posted. All right, now that we're in Windows, let's set this RGB up. So we're going to need Razer Synapse. Razer Synapse right on there. You can go ahead and download Razer Synapse 3 and just run the install like normal. We're also going to need to pick up the G.Skill RGB software, which we can download from right here. And then we're going to need to go to someplace weird for the MSI one, which is going to be in the Microsoft store. So if you type in MSI, you'll see MSI Center. Go ahead and download that. Now, once you have everything installed, you can open up each individual application. So right now we've got the G.Skill application open, and we can see our DRAM sticks. And we're going to just make sure that this little box right here, external sync, is turned on, and that Razer Chroma is selected. We hit apply, and that's going to kick it over to Razer Chroma. We can now close this app. Now, for MSI, we open up their center. All we need to do is we need to install Mystic Light. And now all we need to do in here is click this thing that looks like a little Razer logo. Boop. And now we are synced to specifically Razer Chroma. It's going to do its thing. Boom. And we are now controlled there. And now all we need to do is go to Razer Synapse, and we're going to see very different icons here. We've got our Govee icon, because I talked about that a little bit. We've got Mystic Light. We've got G.Skill. We've got the ASRock Tai Chi, and we got the Basilisk. But from here, we can easily change the color of the G.Skill memory. We can sync it to all the same effects. And we can even make it run through the various different applications. So if we use something like Wallpaper Engine, and we set to one of these wallpapers that has Chroma enabled, all of our RAM and our fans and our graphics card are all synced. So what do you think about this system? Do you like it? Do you like the idea of having that one RGB software running at all times, controlling everything? Would you prefer a blackout system? Or would you prefer a system made with all Corsair parts? Or all NZXT parts? These are all options that we can do in the future and systems that we can easily build. And if you have any questions about building something like this, leave a comment down below. And if you're not subscribed, get subscribed because we're gonna have another PC build coming really soon. And this one's gonna get interesting, but that's for another day. Thank you for watching. Wolfie, out.